Stannis and his army marched on foot through the snow and frozen dirt, nearly 2,000 men marching along the northern tundra. He marched unmatched for most of the travel, for the most part, but that would change as of 2 days ago his camps were ransacked by Ramsay Bolton, the heir to the Dreadfort and quite possibly the most vile man in the north, more so than that of his father. With his men freezing and no horses, Stannis alone, without Davos at his side and without Melisandre to use her magic to aid him, did the unthinkable. Massing the large piles of shit his men produced, along with any belongings they could spare, erected 10 great spires within their camp, using their tents and siege equipment they could spare, and after 4 excruciating hours were able to light the fires. They would survive the night, eating small leftover rations as the fires, along with collective mass of body heat, would melt the frozen snow and ice around them. Luckily, due to the snow and blizzard, they had no shortage of water. Upon the second morning, Stannis would learn the state of his army. Of the near 2,000 he marched with, nearly 400 would die of frostbite and the cold, with another 200 sellswords having abandoned the cause. Luckily, the entire northern force had stayed along with the bannermen he had brought with Dragonstone, those most loyal to him. With few supplies and morale low and no horses, Stannis would rally his men.
The Boltons were smart to attack our horses, but the traitors know nothing of northern grit and loyalty. Those that have fled have shown they shouldn't be here, and those that have perished have left us rations and arms to use. Winterfell is but 1 day away. We are low on food and have no shelter. The only place to go is forward. We march whether it's to victory or death. We march. They say the North remembers, well as do I, to Winterfell, to war. We march.
Off the coast of Hardhome, Mance Rayder stood looking over the side of the ship. Next to him was Val, a wildling princess of sorts. They had gathered a few thousand of wildlings onto the ship so far, and work was hard underway. Mance had specifically escorted Val to the flagship of Stannis' fleet, ensuring she got to safety. Many did not know the monstrous things that lay beyond the wall, but the wildlings knew. Mance, the former king beyond the wall, knew. A darkness laid claim to the lands. There was nothing left for them other than death. Everything else belonged to the others. As Mance promised Val and the wildlings on the ship that things were going to be better and safer for them, a rumbling could suddenly be heard. With an unearthly chill rocking the ships, screams could be heard from land, and Mance in terror would see the calamity befall his chosen people. A great mass of white snow, an ice storm unparalleled, would come crashing down upon the Hardhome. Mance and the others would be unable to do anything to help as the ships rocked back and forth nearly a mile off the coast as waves pushed them farther away. Those within the ships would cry out in terror as they saw their loved ones still on land become swallowed whole. Worse though, only Mance and a few other keen-eyed others would see, within the snow, silhouettes of a slaughter. Something was within the storm. Something had come and taken those that remained. As the ships sailed away, the great storm would also disappear back into the horizon, and it came from, with leaving only a cursed silence. Jon stood nervously. He knew the day would come, but he never knew it came this way, let alone with a girl of noble birth, and him, a Stark. 1 week had passed, and Jon now was in Carhold, about to marry Alice Karstark. The ceremony was certainly rushed, but desperate times called for fast action. Jon would look as many stood to the side, watching Alice enter the great hall. She wore a less formal wedding dress, opting for more standard dress attire for a lady, as the cold was coming more often. The two would share smiles, and even Jon would feel a sense of a heart pull as he laid eyes upon her. Alice, in turn, would also see Jon and feel comfort that after all the lords in the north for her to be her suitor, she was lucky enough to have one of the best. To her, Jon was brave and a fierce warrior, all of his trials and tribulations, and he now was a man that started as a bastard who would become warden of the north under Stannis. To have someone so kind yet so knightly was truly a blessing for her, a bonus that he was quite handsome as well.
My dearest Jon Snow, I humbly speak these vows of duty, loyalty, and love. From this day forward I shall bear your children, support your cause, and bring you nothing but respect, loyalty, and love as your wife.
To Jon, Alice was a very beautiful lady. She was pure to him. Both of the families, targeted by betrayal, uniting once more to end a great evil in their land. She showed him great kindness, regardless of his former status as a bastard, and hoped to return her kindness with his own. He would avenge their families and make the North a safe place for their new one.
My dear Alice, from this day forward as your husband, I promise to be the best father to our children as I can be. I promise to always be faithful, honorable, and loyal to you and our house. I vow on the respect and love I have for you and that of my late father.
The two would speak their vows as Melisandre would perform the ceremony. Davos and Tormund would be present, as well as Sam, Arya, Rickon, Theon, Osha, Ed, and the young lady Shireen. Jojen and Mira had continued on north beyond the wall with Bran, to where fate had decided that is where they must be needed. Jon would bid Alice farewell, along with Arya and Rickon. They, along with Sam and the young Princess Shireen, would stay in Carhold. With the wedding over, Jon with his new warband of Ed, Davos, and the Hound with their new force of Northmen would march. They would even make contact with Mance and Tormund with their army of wildlings. An army of nearly 3,000 now marched on the Dreadfort, their banners the White Star of the Karstarks, the Dire Wolf of the Starks, banners of crows, bears, and other wildling clans, with lastly an inverse of the Stark banner, a white dire wolf upon a black field, with a white crow hovering above head, a nod to those Jon looked up to most. Frey troops continued the prolonged siege of Riverrun. For months now, the garrison under the command of the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, have held strong, with most of the civilians having been sent away by the Blackfish's command to avoid being attacked by the Freys, intelligently grabbing most of what was left over of grain and food for themselves. Even more beneficial was that of all the armies to face the Tullys, lucked out with their opponents being the Freys. Lacking in proper siege encampments allowed the much smaller Tully troops to sneak out sorties of men to gather critters and other forms of food to continue the defense. With no other leverage other than their numbers, the Freys also failed to make any forms of diplomacy or surrender from the Tully garrison. Even worse for Blackwalder was the growing raids on the Riverlands by some band of marauders calling themselves the Brotherhood. Some pompous former lord and his merry men waving flaming swords. With growing pressure from his father, Blackwalder pushed for some form of closure. Luckily, or be it unluckily, closure was at hand. Dawn had come, and with the rising sun, a shadow on the field growing over the Frey encampment. What would start as a small tremor, mainly going unnoticed, would begin to turn into a whirling, thundering rumble. Horns would begin to blow, and men would shout. Blackwalder would exit his tent to see what the commotion was about, only to his bewilderment, the panic he would witness and his men would quickly take him as well. Fires were erupting as dozens or hundreds of horsemen ran rampant amongst the Frey encampment. Men were trampled and skewered by spears. 2 men with flaming swords set every tent they came across ablaze. The banners were that of a fish, crocodile, and eagle. Rivermen and Northmen came from the trees and hills en masse, hacking away at the Frey men. Each strike with an axe or blade was penance for a lost loved one from the Red Wedding for the Northerns and Rivermen. The surprising aid of the Brotherhood and that of the Knights of the Vale was truly a great turning point of the siege. Blackwalder would find a horse and begin riding away with his routing men, seeing in the back behind him the gates of Riverrun open and the garrison sallying out to join the battle. The end result was never in question. With the battle over, the Blackfish would look over the field and see a group walk to him. The Blackfish would have a proud smile on his face as he looked upon his rescuers. Sir Beric Dondarrion, Sir Thoros of Myr, Lord Howland Reed, as well as Brienne of Tarth, her squire Podrick, and Lord Royce. Walking up to the Blackfish was Edmure himself, escorting 2 women. Edmure would present to his uncle, his wife Rosalind, and Sansa Stark, the new Lady of the Vale. Brandon would welcome Sansa and Rosalind with open arms, giving Edmure a nod of approval, having earned his respect. Word would reach Roose of the chaos that was befalling his new kingdom, and anger raging inside of him as a faint sense of fear would creep over him. With his son Ramsay having returned from his raid on Stannis' encampment, Roose would hear that Ned's bastard, Jon Snow, was now on the march to the Dreadfort, with him wildlings and Karstarks. Knowing that without his cavalry, Stannis was now a sitting duck, Roose would decide that he would send Ramsay with half their army to attack Jon Snow in the rear as they lay siege to the Dreadfort. With him, he will also take the Frey garrison they also had and use them as fodder. As for Roose, he, with the remaining 3,000, will stay at Winterfell and wait for Stannis and his ransacked and withered army to arrive. When they do, he'll flay the Southern King himself. Stannis and his army crest over the hillside as they marched upon the icy open field. Winterfell came into view, and Stannis with his forces began to give a sigh of relief, having reached their destination. Stannis would begin to tell his men to stay sharp and keep an open eye. Within the hour, they would start hacking down the nearby trees and begin making siege works and defenses. Yet one of Stannis' men would comment that there wouldn't be a siege. Stannis would look to see Roose Bolton and a large cavalry force riding out to meet them. The irony. After all Stannis had done and gone through, he was now about to face the trial of his life. He counted what seemed to be some 2,000 or so riding out to face him. Stannis would chuckle, thinking of Renly. In his mind, Stannis would ask Renly that if he fails today, then to forgive him, for he thought he was doing what was best for everyone. Stannis would draw his sword Lightbringer, its glowing blade shining like a burning green flame. Seeing their commander square up to the horde coming down upon them, many of the immediate close force began to draw swords and close ranks with their commander. "Square! Square!" men would shout. A strong phalanx would form in the front as the northern men began to curve their line. In the rear, the rest of the sellswords would flee hoping to escape, but would be the first to be run down by the flanking Bolton horse riders. The mountain clans would also break ranks, but instead of fleeing, would attempt to clash the Boltons in a melee. Of the near 1,500 Stannis had left with, in the opening minutes to half hour of the battle, almost 700 would be slaughtered. Maybe more, taking only some 300 or so of them in kind. Roose would then sort his men into 4 separate detachments surrounding Stannis' position, with a final group of some 200 archers in the front. Under Roose's command, the archers would let loose their arrows, peppering the Northmen. 3 volleys would fall upon the northern coalition, followed by a rotating series of cavalry charges upon the northern line. For 3 hours, 6 separate charges would crash upon the Northmen, and each time Stannis would repel the Boltons. Yet for each charge, a few dozen of their own men would fall, taking an equal number of Boltons in kind. Roose, growing impatient, would ready his men once more, this time for a final push, seeing the cracks form upon Stannis' army. Seeing that this was likely to be the final push, as much of each side was worn and exhausted, Stannis would loudly laugh. His loud boasts so uncharacteristic of the stern southern king, his taunts and loud pride on full display, his mockery of Roose being so loud and morally uplifting he could have easily been mistaken for the late great Jon Umber, or even his older brother, Robert Baratheon. This man, win or lose, was already their king, Stannis Baratheon, the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms, the southern king, the king who cared, and now the king of the north. Banners rose up around the Northmen, showing their houses amongst them, the burning Stagheart. Stannis was amongst men, real men, his new brothers of the battlefield. Roose sounded the horn, and in one great charge, they came crashing down. The Bolton archers would loose one more volley overhead to hit the Northmen, disrupting their brace. Stannis would raise his sword, calling for his men to hold as the army smashed. It would be in that moment Stannis would feel it. A single arrow would pierce his exposed armpit. 2 of his men would catch their commander before he could fall. 3 Bolton men would clash against them, with Stannis using his other hand to catch a spear from piercing his face. 4 more men from each side would clutch together as they closed into melee. 5 men fell every second. 6 times Stannis rallied men around him to keep fighting and going. On the 7th, his arm was knocked back, snapping the arrow into his side. 8 Bolton men, seeing Stannis drop in pain, attempted to rush him, with Roose leading the attack. Yet 9 Northmen came to Stannis' aid as he picked back up his sword Lightbringer. Stannis killed 10 men with such a ferocious pain inducing berserk that those seeing the green sword hacking away began to flee in terror. It was as if Robert Baratheon himself was on the battlefield. By the end of it, the Bolton army was routed and fleeing, with the last remaining couple hundred of Northmen standing proud. But their victory was a Pyrrhic one. Stannis himself dismounted and captured Roose, bashing his pommel into Roose's face, knocking him out cold. The battle was over, and Winterfell was freed. Stannis walked over the battlefield to see his spoils, yet unbeknownst to many, Stannis began to feel the air and life leave his body. The arrowhead was still lodged into his side, and the battle having pushed it further in. As one of the soldiers would call out to him, Stannis would collapse. It began with a horn blow. On each side of the battlefield, the two armies faced one another. Not wanting to be pinned by the dreadful and Ramsay, Jon ordered his army to reposition themselves away from the castle to draw out Ramsay's army. The command was given. Ramsay ordered his cavalry to charge Jon's army. The Karstark cavalry, led by Jon himself, rode out to meet their foes. Ramsay mocked Jon for being so reckless, giving the command to begin a full tilt charge, yet halfway to meeting each other, Jon would give his command, and the Karstark cav would turn about and begin to retreat. Unable to fully catch the Karstark cav, the cavalry charge would be made effectively useless. Even more surprising at this time, Stark and Karstark levies had also moved forward, forming a strong spear wall. They created gaps in their ranks, allowing Jon and his horsemen to move through before closing once more. With no longer an effective charge, and having committing fully to an attack, the Bolton cav was stopped in its place. Jon's horsemen, using this infantry as anvil, would flank back around, with Ed taking the other flank of cav, and smash like a hammer on the Bolton cavalry, effectively surrounding them, making them unable to flee. Davos, seeing the success of their trap, would draw his sword and ready the second line with Theon. They gave the command and began marching forward. Ramsay, feeling played, would call his archers forward, and began giving the command to loose all of their arrows. Volley after volley would rain upon the center. Davos, seeing their arrows, would fall and shout for them to protect their lord. Jon would take an arrow in his back as he hunched over to cover himself, before he would fall from his horse. The hound would lift him on to his horse and attempt to ride him out of the battle. Yet upon the next volley, the hound's horse would be struck, flinging the two off. Seeing his chance and keeping a close eye, Ramsay would then give command for a full charge. With the Frey garrison bolstering his force, his army greatly outnumbered Jon's. The time was now to kill the bastard. Quickly advancing, the two army grew closer to meeting in the center. A skirmish then raged on. The hound would pick Jon back up, telling him there was a battle to win. Jon, seeing Ramsay's army approach, would give his horn to the hound. Jon, still catching his breath, would tell the hound to give the signal. The hound would blow the horn 3 times, catching Ramsay off guard as he slowed, watching his army rush on ahead. He would then notice the terrain around him. There were 2 large clusters of trees on each side of the battle. Looking forward again, he saw that the only banners were that of Stark, Karstark, White Stark, and Baratheon. Where were the wildlings? Unfortunately for Ramsay, he would have his answer. From the left flank, some 400 wildlings led by Tormund Giantsbane. On the right, another some 300 Scargosian Thyns, led by wildling chieftains Carsey and Loboda. Ramsay would attempt to call retreat, not wishing to be swamped, but would be alerted by his captain of the rear. Mance Rayder, with remaining 800 wildlings, had closed their last form of retreat. The Boltons had been lured completely into a trap by Jon and his commanders. The clash of steel devolved completely into a melee, and for all intents and purposes, a massacre. Yet, unfortunately for Jon, still in the thick of it, had to continue fighting. His army was technically smaller than that of the Boltons, and they had to kill many of them fast to break them en route. Jon would kill multiple foes, fighting his way along the field, with the Hound and Ed staying close to him, knowing he was hurt, and wishing to keep their commander alive. Davos and Theon also killed many, attempting to reach up with Jon. Jon himself, seeing Loboda take an arrow into the head, would move to aid Carsey, who found herself surrounded. Mance would see Tormund, and the two would close ranks as they pushed deeper into the mosh pit of death. Jon would save Carsey from being struck in the rear, but in kind would take a spear tip to the side. Ed would shout for Jon as he killed 2 more Boltons defending the spear wife of Mance Rayder, when suddenly he would feel another arrow enter his chest. None of Jon's friends or allies would reach him as he stood his ground. 2 more times, a Bolton knight would attempt to kill Jon, only for Jon to strike them down, yet still be pierced with an arrow. The culprit was Ramsay, who, with his bow, drew closer on the battlefield. Jon found himself frozen on the field, staring at Ramsay, who let loose a 4th and final arrow, piercing Jon in the heart. Ramsay, seeing his work done, attempted to flee from the battle. Carsey held Jon, the man who defended her, as Mance and the others arrived to see Jon lifeless in her arms. The battle was won, and yet the cost was possibly too high. Ramsay ran with exhausted haste along the woods. He could not return to the Dreadfort as the Northmen and between him and the castle. His best hope would be to flee back to his father at Winterfell, who would have likely beaten Stannis by now. Yet, as he stopped to catch his breath, Ramsay found himself in an eerie silence. It would be then he came face to face with a true beast, a pale white dire wolf, its fur covered in blood, none of it which is his own. The two locked eyes, and Ramsay was frozen still, seeing within the red eyes of Ghost a vague familiarity. It was as if he was staring Jon in the eyes once more. Ramsay stood no chance, as with the show of his fangs, Ghost leapt onto Ramsay, his jaws clamping down and snapping the bones of Ramsay's jaw and skull. Ghost did more than just maim and kill Ramsay. Ghost would go on to chew and devour the shattered skull of Ramsay itself, feasting upon him with a gluttonous vengeance for his master. Over the coming 2 days, all would gather at Winterfell under Stannis' behest. He knew what no others did. He was dying. The arrowhead was removed, but the fever had not left him. Melisandre with Thoros of Myr would argue to Stannis to let them heal them, but Stannis would deny them all once he saw the fallen body of Jon when it arrived to be prepared for burial in the crypt. Stannis would then order Melisandre and Thoros to bring Jon back. When they protested and argued, Stannis would tell them that it was an order by their king, and to refuse such an order would mean death. Melisandre, following the prayers and instructions of Thoros on how he could revive Beric, prepared Jon to perform the ritual. After some time, though, nothing would happen. One by one, many of those most loyal to Jon would leave the room, yet Stannis, not shaken in his belief in Melisandre and Thoros' magic, would stay. Those that chose to stay with Stannis were Davos, the Princess Shireen, who wished to stay by her father's side, Arya, who did not wish to leave her brother again, Mance Rayder, who owed it to Jon to wait after saving his wife, and lastly, Alice, his wife, who, while having only known Jon for a short time, found herself, in some form, have love for him. Ghost leaned against Alice, waiting, his ears peeking up, as he rose to face the body. With Ghost getting their attention, everyone watched with anticipation as they saw Jon's chest move. Jon would wake with a great gasp of air. He had come back from the depths of blackness. No one in the room had seen a dead man rise before, at least, and still be human. Jon would question how he was back, to which they would all turn to Stannis, who struggled to catch his breath. Jon would ask why Stannis chose to save him, other than himself, and Stannis would comment that he is old, and his reign would be short if he ever made it back south. But Jon was still young, and had all the same advisors he had. He could lead them through the nights and wars to come. He could be the protector and savior the realms of men need. The one to make it all right. It was time for Stannis to pass on the torch, as he had found his heir in Jon. Even more miraculously, Mira Reed, with the aid of cold hands, would return alone from beyond the wall, seeing that while she had lost her brother, Bran, she last saw him, was safe. He had become the three-eyed raven, is what he had told her. Stannis would pass that night from his fever, and many would wonder what would become of the North. Yet no one would attest now that Jon was alive then. He would be crowned the new king of the North. Jon would hold a council of his lords the day after. Many things would change as Jon would make his first decrees as king. First and foremost, Jon would announce the betrothals of Rickon and Shireen, with Jon naming Rickon the new lord of Winterfell. Mance Rayder and Tormund Giantsbane would each be named Northern Lords, and their clans, along with the other wildlings that came south, would be given the empty and decommissioned castles of the Night's Watch. The Bolton and Frey prisoners they had would be given to the Wall to join the Watch or face death. Next, Jon would name Gendry Rivers, the bastard of Robert Baratheon, as his true legal son, renaming him Gendry Baratheon, granting him the Dreadfort. Sansa, now the Lady of the Vale, would be named Warden of the East, with young sweet Robb and Arryn finally having their wedding. Theon would be granted Moat Cailin for his bravery and service to House Stark, with Theon taking Mira as his betrothal. Davos would be named Hand of the King, and Sam his maester. Melisandre would be named Master of Whispers, as her magic made her a powerful ally. Ed, who has been his closest friend and right hand since they first set out to capture Jaime, will be knighted and pardoned fully from the Night's Watch, being named captain of his guard. Sir Beric would be named Lord Commander of Jon's Kingsguard, with an allowance to take wives. The other members of Jon's Kingsguard would include Thoros of Myr and the Hound. The Blackfish, with a happy acceptance of Edmure, would be granted Riverrun as its new Lord and Warden of the South. Jon would then now declare that the last part of enemy-controlled territory within their lands was the Twins, and that upon its capture would be given to Edmure and Rosalind, and their child shall inherit it from them. They had won their war in the north from the Boltons and freedom from tyranny. Now they must do the same for their brothers and sisters in the Riverlands that is still under dispute, with the last traitor Walder Frey still holding Parable and a sizable army. That night, Jon was standing out on the balcony, looking out the wild country of the north. Winter had officially been declared by Old Town. Even more so, word had reached all corners of Westeros. Daenerys Targaryen had arrived at Dragonstone, thanks to a fleet of Dornish ships. They brought with her nearly 8,000 Unsullied and 20,000 Dothraki, with Dorne declaring her as their true ruler. Jaime Lannister had taken control of the Lannister army, and with Randyll Tarly marched on their enemies in the Crownlands, preparing for invasion. As for the Faith Militant, their rise in King's Landing would not last long, as Bronn would be hired by Cersei to kill the High Sparrow and those that followed him. An uneasy alliance would be put in place between the two queens, under behest of Tommen, who had Jaime's support and wisdom to intervene as the Dornish uprising, an eastern invasion of the Dragon Queen, would force them to unite or die. 4 of the 7 kingdoms were against them. The Ironborn were against everyone, and now 4 invasion was upon them with 3 dragons. For the Lannisters, it was truly the end of times. Jon once more found himself standing frozen, the vision clear as he would have at every other few nights. Stood in a field of snow. Behind him, the wall collapsed. Above head, 3 dragons swirling in a circle. Millions of people dead laid out, as he seemed to stand in the eye of a great icy hurricane. Standing across from him, a being he had never seen before, but he had heard them mentioned by the free folk. The others they referred to, and standing before Jon was their leader. His skin was ice, and his eyes blue and empty. His sword made of ice as he pointed his finger at Jon. Jon would turn to see Bran standing next to him. Jon would ask what was going on, and Bran would tell him that he was looking for Jon. Jon would ask why, and Bran would tell him because he wants revenge. Jon would ask what he did for him to want revenge against him, and Bran would tell him that Jon had killed him long ago in another life. And that is going to wrap up this story. It's been a long time coming, and I'm finally happy to get it done and bring it to you guys. As you can probably guess by how this video turned out, a lot of work went into it with the whole AI imaging and voices and everything. Shout out to the artists that I found online that will be in the comments below. But yeah, that's going to wrap up Jon's storyline, the whole War in the North coming back to life and all that stuff. Will I be making more of these? Absolutely, but for now, I guess you guys just have to wait and check out the next update video that's coming up. I'll explain more. But yeah, happy to bring these stories to you guys. This has been JD signing out. Bye.
Oh, star killers, we win this race. Skywalkers, we claim this space. Rogue smuggler, my name is Han Solo. Gassed up, my crew going loco. Star killers, we win this race. Skywalkers, we claim this space. Rogue smuggler, my name is Han Solo.